Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bill Kastnauser. I'm with the City of Scottsdale in Water Conservation, and I'm presenting today on the Finding and Fixing Leaks. It's a virtual program for you today, and I hope everybody's not having any leaks right now, because if you're watching this to go out and do some leaks, then you've got a leak that needs some attention. We've got a presentation today. It's all on a brochure that we use called Finding and Fixing Leaks. It can be draining your budget. Hopefully it's not. So we'll go ahead and get started. This is an interesting picture. So you found a serious leak underneath your sink. What should you do? Well, that leak isn't really all that serious, even though he's got quite the face. If I found that leak, I would probably make some potato soup. That's the right thing to do with that. If you actually had a leak underneath there, you'd probably have some damage to your cabinetry. Yeah, leaks cost you money. If you're saving water and not leaking any water, you'll probably be saving money at your home. Leaks can happen in a lot of different places at your house. In some of the cities in the valley, there's some direction to go to the end of the system to where the swimming pool is as the first place to look for leaks. In Scottsdale, we recommend starting at the beginning, starting at the water meter, and identifying what happens at the water meter and using that information to guide you along. You could also have, outdoor leaks that you would need to address. You could have the indoor leaks that you might need to look and find. The answer to all those questions, when you learn how to use a water meter, is the isolation method. It's the best way to become 100% sure of what is actually leaking. Once you're confident that you don't have a leak, there's a lot of other items that you can do to make yourself more efficient around the home, whether they're indoor items or outdoor items, and we'll talk some about those as well. So, the nitty-gritty, how to read a water meter. Generally, your water meter is going to be outside your home. At most residential properties, the water meter is located out by the curb. It has, a lot of cases it'll have a metal lid, a lot of cases it'll have a plastic lid. In most cases, it'll identify it that it's water in some way. It's kind of in a box, and we would ask you to use a long screwdriver to remove the lid. You might need a rag too to clean the area, but as soon as you open it up, you want to be careful, because there could be a lot of different things inside of a water meter box. It's typically depending on what kind of soil it's in, and if it's in a wet lawn, it's probably going to have some insects in it. Maybe on occasion a reptile. From time to time, even some small animals. I've had little chipmunks come running out, and when I open the lid up, and different things like that. So most of our water meters are quite simple to read. A lot of them, the smaller ones, everything from 1 inch, 3/4 inch, and the 5/8 inch water meters have 10 gallons on the face of them. Each time that red needle passes the 0, the tens digit is what changes. The image in the bottom left-hand corner shows the sweep second hand kind of on the 1 right now. It's a little bit past the 1 from my angle. And the 1 that it's pointed at would be called out for the 0. The 0 at the far right end of the read is a placeholder for the single number of gallons. If the needle were on 2, the read in that picture would be 1356412. If you notice, in between the 1 and the 2, there's a great big line at the 5. Those are 5/10 of a gallon. So it actually could be 1.5, or, you know, wherever it is, it's very specific. There are tenths in between the gallons. Paying attention to where it is going to help you to figure out what's going on at your house. There's also a flow indicator. In this image, it's that black triangle that's next to the 25. And that black triangle, if there's water going through your water meter, it's going to have some kind of a spin to it. It generally rotates on a center axis, a little pin that runs in the center of it, and it would spin around as water is going through the water meter to indicate that the water meter does have water flowing through it. So you want to pay attention to the flow indicator. And if you ever have anything going on at your home, we recommend that you go out to the water meter and try to identify it first. So here's a closer look at the water meter. You see the red needle on the 1. That's a replacement for the 0. The 1 is the single number of gallons. There's 10 gallons on the face of that meter. So as the red needle passes the 0, the 1 in the tens digit mark would change to a 2. So it's 9 gallons away from being 420 on the end of the read. So on most of our water meters, and I have one sitting here in front of me, that 0 is a painted on 0. It's not a rolling digit. It's a painted on 0. It doesn't move. The needle is the indicator of where that is right now. So the triangle in Scottsdale, most of our triangles aren't black like that. They are red, so they stick out as well. And if you have a really, really small leak, the triangle may appear not to be moving, but it may be moving ever so slowly. So most of the time when you're going to look at a water meter, it's going to be for a period of time, over 10 minutes or 20 minutes. Here's a little example of what you would do if you were doing what we call the continuous leak test. So you've got something going on at the house, you don't have anything turned on, and you go out and you look at the water meter and it's actually moving a little bit. You can see that it's moving at a pretty good clip. The first thing you would do is you would write down the read, and as we saw it on that water meter that we were just looking at, the read was 135, and it's up there where it says first read right now, 135.6411. Well, if you wrote that down and you wrote down the time that you did it, and you let some time expire, and in most cases we let 10 to 20 minutes expire. In this situation, the second read is what we saw after those 10 or 20 minutes, and it's 1356423. And you would do a general subtraction of the first read from the second read, and the answer in that situation is 12. Well, if it's 12 divided by 10 minutes, it tells you the amount of leak per minute. And that's going to help you find the leak when you know how much the leak is. If it's 20 minutes, it's a smaller leak. But even at 20 minutes, that's still over a half a gallon a minute. And 1/10 of a gallon per minute times 60 minutes in an hour, times 24 hours a day, times 30 days in a month, turns into 4,320 gallons in a month. So that 12 divided by 20 is 0.6. So it would be 6 times 4,320, or around 2,500 gallons, a little more than 2,500, almost 2,600 gallons. So just simply writing down that first read and letting some time go by and monitoring how much time it is, doing the subtraction, finding out how much it is, and dividing by the number of minutes of your test gives you an idea exactly how big your leak is. So if you've determined that you have a leak, now you have to determine where it is. So this image of the street, the landscape, and the house represents what we call the service line. The service line is the water supply that comes from the street to the water meter, which is generally the city's responsibility. And then from the water meter to the house is the homeowner's responsibility. If you do this the way the city of Scottsdale recommends it, the very first thing that you would do is find where that service line first enters into your house and shutting off the water at the entry point into the home. You would then go back to the water meter and verify that it's either moving still or not moving. Now, if it's moving still, it's scary because it's telling you that you have a leak between the meter and the house. And a lot of times that could be running underneath landscaping, underneath pavers, sometimes underneath the concrete of the driveway. So that can be very disturbing kind of a leak and a very expensive repair. So ideally, when you shut the house off and you go back to the water meter, everything comes to a complete stop. That means you have no problems with your service line. Now, walking up and down your service line, you can look for little things like wet spots or areas where it looks like it's sunk. You know, little clues. There are little clues that you can look at that might tell you that there is where the problem is. A lot of times the problems are where connections have been made. So a lot of times the leak will be right in the water meter box, and it'll be the point where the water meter joins to the service line. Or it could be closer to the house where the pipe makes a bend, or if somebody has used some fittings on it. Ideally, there are no fittings on your service line. It's rolled copper. They bring it out. It's all one piece. There are no repairs or connections that have to be made to get it to your house. It's all one piece of pipe. And the only place where it is connected is where it comes up and joins into the valve that you shut off to shut it off going into your house. But those are that's the most critical place and probably the most expensive thing to fix. Other things can be expensive, but this one is a little bit scarier than others. So at your house, the systems are different at everybody's house. You've got all the stuff that's in the house. You've got the service line. You've got the irrigation system, and you can think of these as little segments of areas where you can have leaks. And if you have things like swimming pools or fountains or spas, those are all individual little systems that need to be identified and checked. Most of those systems have a device that you can shut off that'll help you determine whether the leak is in that area. So depending on where your irrigation supply comes off of that supply line coming into your house, it can be live when you're doing your service line check, or it can be not live. It all depends on whether the irrigation supply comes off in front of the shutoff valve or after the shutoff valve. In most of the houses in Scottsdale, the irrigation comes off after the shutoff valve, but a lot of times people will have a plumber change it if they intend to not be around in the summertime, especially around here. People do that so that they can shut the house off to reduce the opportunity for leaks in the house and still have the irrigation take care of the landscaping while they're not here, while it's, you know, scorching hot. So that's the change. In the situation where the irrigation is in front of the house shut off, to make sure that the service line isn't the problem, you have to shut off both the irrigation and the service line. So that's kind of a real critical thing there. If it's after the house shut off, you only have to shut off the house shut off to verify that. Now, anytime you shut something off, the very first thing you want to do is go back to the water meter and find out, what is the water meter telling me? Once you have the main shut off and you're checking your service line, you want to go back there and see that there's no water use going through the water meter. If that's the case, that's a very good thing, and you can move on to the next system around the house. So even if your irrigation system is after the main shut off, you then want to shut the irrigation system off with your house supply turned back on, so that you can go back to the water meter and see, did shutting off the irrigation system have any effect on my leak? Ideally, it could. It's where most of our leaks are, in our irrigation systems. We live in the desert in a very warm climate that has the need for quite a bit of replacement of water in order for plants to look healthy. That's what irrigation is. It's simply the replacement of water that's come up missing to keep those plants happy. And if your irrigation system is leaking, and from time to time it is our largest culprit in this world where we live in, you shut that backflow, the water supply to the irrigation system off, and you go back to the water meter and the leak stops, it's telling you you've got some kind of an irrigation issue. Now, there are other systems that are problematic as well. Each one of those, we've got the little box in the corner here that has the 3 different irrigation valves in it. Those 3 valves look like they're all drip irrigation, but something in that box is leaking, and that's probably going to be a problem. That leak will probably dry up when you shut the backflow preventer off. It might not dry up immediately because it's probably been leaking for quite some time, but in order to determine what exactly is leaking in there, you have to turn it off and let it dry up, and then turn it back on, maybe even clean some of that dirt out so that you can see all the parts and pieces and see where that water comes from initially to see what needs to be repaired. We can have other leaks on our systems that are more difficult to see, more difficult to find. Irrigation controllers don't generally mess up to the point where they turn water on. It is possible that they would have water on or have some kind of a signal that's keeping a valve running, but it's very rare. It's less likely to be a problem than something going wrong with one of the irrigation valves. So knowing where that shutoff is, knowing where that thing, we call it the backflow preventer, which is the beginning of the irrigation system. It has those 2 little blue handled valves on it up there in the upper left-hand corner of this image. And ideally, we would shut off the downstream valve, which is the one that's up there at the top, parallel. It's running parallel with the horizon of that pipe up there. And if you turned it perpendicular to the pipe, that would be shutting it off. When it's parallel with the pipe, that means it's on. So shutting off, knowing where that shutoff is critical important, because if you've got something that is leaking in your yard, shutting off the irrigation controller doesn't always stop that leak. It's considered to be a hydraulic leak. It's water flowing, and something that is supposed to be shutting it off, like the irrigation valve, isn't doing its job any longer. And being able to go out and shut that water off will stop that leak until a repair can be made. So other leaks that you might run into, those are going to generally be continuous leaks that are happening there in that irrigation valve box. And it's generally a problem with the irrigation fittings or the valves. But you can have leaks that aren't continuous leaks on your irrigation system as well. Things like if you have a sprinkler head that is the wrong kind, or a sprinkler that's been damaged and is missing and it's shooting water up in the air. broken drip irrigation where the guys came and they trimmed a plant or something and they trimmed the emitter off, that can create quite a big leak in a drip irrigation system. About 3 of those leaks is equal to about 1 gallon per minute. So having a considerable amount of that kind of broken or cut tubing on the 1/4 inch tubing, that can create quite a larger gallons per minute that is used for every minute that your drip irrigation system is running. The picture on the right is some equipment that is probably the wrong equipment for that little tiny yard. Ideally, if we were turning our sprinklers on, none of the water from our sprinklers would exit the lawn area. It would all stay within the grass. All the irrigation is designed to shoot in from the perimeters, and if we're using the right size equipment at the right pressures, it'll all stay in the yard. Any water that's landing outside of the yard can be considered water that's being wasted. And it's going to grow things. It's going to grow weeds and create problems. And if it gets on the sidewalk, it's actually a violation of the city ordinance. If you have water running down the streets, chances are you're going to get told about it because it's a finable offense. So we don't want to have any of these type of things happening in our yard. These are not continuous leaks. These are leaks that are happening when our systems are running. Okay, let's move on to the swimming pool area. Swimming pools can be problematic. You know, once your pool's, you don't consider it new anymore, it could start showing you all kinds of other problems. And the answer to finding out if your pool is having any issues is what we call the bucket test. It's a leak test where you put a bucket of water or some kind of a pail or a container in the pool, and you fill it up with water to the same level as the pool. In this situation, they're marking the level of the water on the inside and the outside of the bucket. And then they're going to just let evaporation take its course. They shut off the supply. If there's a supply to a float that keeps the level at a certain place, they shut that off so that the pool can evaporate and the bucket can evaporate. Now, if for some reason the pool is losing water, the water level in the bucket will stay higher than the pool. The pool will go down faster, and that'll help you determine that there is a problem there. If you need information on the bucket test, you can check our website. We run through it. It can be done a couple of different ways. I always recommend that you do the bucket test with the water supply off and do it one time with your pool equipment on for about 3 or 4 days and one time with your pool equipment off. A lot of time it's our equipment that's leaking. The leak can be over there by the filter or by the motors or through the backwash setup. There's lots of opportunities for leaks with a swimming pool, as well as with a fountain or a jacuzzi or any type of a spa. Fountains are notoriously hard to keep the water in them. They're always going to get old. They're going to need some maintenance. And on a regular basis, you're going to have a leak that's going to need to be taken care of. Floats, the devices that fill pools and spas, don't last forever. Nothing does. So they generally are in a condition where they're in that moist environment of the pool, and something happens, the moisture gets to the metal and it comes apart, and you end up with a problem. Identifying that problem, being able to go to your water meter and identify that there's water use going on is going to help you to solve any type of an issue that you have around your pool. Being able to perform that bucket test to determine that the pool is going down faster than general evaporation is going to help you identify it as well. When you walk around your pool equipment, look at everything. Look at the autofill, look at the lines where the autofill runs to the house. Generally, there's going to be a backflow on the house as well. In most situations, there are some older houses that they didn't do that. back in the day, but for right now, most houses where the water comes from the back of the house to the swimming pool is going to have a miniature backflow preventer that you can turn off to check to see if there's a leak. Isolating that valve and going back to the water meter is a wonderful way to determine if the water use is happening in my pool. I talked earlier about some of the other cities in the valley recommend going to the pool first. Pools can be a really big problem, and in some other studies that we've done, there's a large percentages of pools that have problems. We have a rebate program where we pay people to take their swimming pool out if they don't want to have it any longer. And a lot of times when things get old and dilapidated, you know, there are always going to become problems. So you got the swimming pool systems, you got your irrigation systems, and then you've got all the stuff that we have in the house. You know, who's the number one suspect in the house? Generally the toilet. The toilet can be the biggest problem, and it can be a silent leak. Sometimes you'll never even hear a toilet leaking. But one of the things that you can do is you can add some dye into the tank simply by lifting the back of the tank cover up, placing some food coloring or some dye in the tank, and waiting 15 minutes, 20 minutes, see if any of that color appears inside the bowl. If that happens, it's talking about the part that's identified as C, or possibly even the part that C drops down into as being defective and needing to be replaced. Most of the time, it is just that part that is C there. The flapper, we call it the flapper. The flapper is made of rubber in most cases, and the flapper being made of rubber and water having chlorine in it to keep it sanitized and clean for you. Rubber and chlorine aren't the best of friends. So chlorine slowly dissolves rubber. And so every couple of years or so, you might have a need to replace your flapper. Or that dye would work its way through and get into the bowl, just like the dye test shows. Other issues, you could have a lot of other issues. One of the other more common issues is that the level of the pool, of the water level in the back of the toilet, in the water closet, it's commonly called, is too high, and it's above the level where it's designed to be. In this image, it's hard to see, but there's a little line that says it's the fill line, and it's not at the top of that white standpipe that's up there. The water level should not exceed the top level of that standpipe, or it'll always be running down the edges of the inside of the toilet, and you'll see a little trickle. You might even hear a little trickle if you've got good hearing. But those are the kind of things that can go wrong with the toilet. And a toilet, you know, if it's really bad, I know that I had a house one time where the people hadn't been to their house in Scottsdale for quite some time, and he could not believe that he had the 20,000 gallons a month increase on his water bill, and that there's no way that it could be a toilet. But eventually the maid let me in the house to go take a look at it, and that rubber flapper looked terrible. It looked like raw hamburger. It was so destroyed from chlorine that it was leaking like a sieve. And I shut the valve off to the supply to the toilet. This is called isolation. When you shut the water supply off to something, I went out to the water meter, and all the water use at the house stopped, which indicated that that was the only thing at the house that was leaking. So we use the isolation method to determine what the device is that's leaking. Anytime you shut off a supply to anything at your home, you want to go back to the water meter and see what effect that had. If it stopped, if the leak stopped, you found the culprit to your leak. Yeah, those flappers are one of the biggest problems in our house. They will go bad. You can almost guarantee that they'll go bad. But they're not the only thing that we have in our house. You have all your sinks and shower heads and faucets, and there are lots of other devices as well in our houses. Um, you know, our refrigerators all have water that comes to them. Sometimes we have humidifiers, sometimes we have water softeners. We can have lots of bells and whistles in our environment. Clothes washer, obviously reverse osmosis is something that we use. Dishwashers, water heaters, and there's lots of other things. Myself, I have a swamp cooler. One of the hardest leaks for me to find was at somebody's house who had a swamp cooler, but they had taken it out of service a long time ago, but it was still up on the top of their house and something had broken and there was a little trickle of water use going on. I looked all over the yard, I looked all over the pool, I looked at the service line, I found nothing. It took quite a while of looking around inside the house to determine that there was a shutoff valve that shut the water off going up to the roof where the swamp cooler was. So there are lots of other devices that can present problems. Water softeners today we're starting to find some of the older ones are giving us all kinds of grief. When they start to fail, they turn into a leak. We don't recommend that you use water softeners, and if you do use one, try to find one that is a super efficient model. So let's talk a little bit more about the isolation method. Anytime you have something that's leaking, like I said, you find anything that's leaking, if you shut that supply line off to it, you're going to shut the leak off. And that's the best way to identify exactly what is leaking. These are two different types of valves that you might run into. These are the kind of valves that might be right there at the base of the house where the water enters into your house. The one on the left is called a gate valve, and the gate valve turns to the right to close it and turns to the left to open it. Inside of a gate valve, there literally is a wedge-shaped gate that is made of brass, and it slides down into a wedge-shaped area, and when you screw it all the way down, it stops the water from coming by because it literally has put a blocker in front of the water. But over time, with mineral content and the age of the metal, things start to happen, and those things can go bad. I've had the situation where I closed one down one time and went to open it back up and the water didn't come back on because the gate got stuck in the place where it was supposed to go to stop the water, but it wouldn't come back out. The handle was spinning and turning and it would never stop. So the threads on the gate valve went bad. And when those threads go bad, you have to go shut the water off at the water meter or call the city to shut the water off at the water meter so that that valve can be changed. Generally, when they change it over to the valve on the right, which is called a ball valve. Ball valves have a stainless steel ball right in the middle of them that is ported. It has a hole drilled right through it. So when you have it parallel to the pipe that it's in, water will pass through it freely. When you turn that valve perpendicular to the pipe that it's in, that port will turn and it'll be completely closed and no water will be able to pass through that valve. They seem to last a lot longer and have a lot less issues than gate valves. If your house still has a gate valve, you can almost plan on the eventuality of having to change it to a ball valve. The thing about ball valves that you want to know about is when you turn a ball valve on, you don't want to just turn it on, especially if the water in all the pipes has been evacuated. There's no water in those pipes. You can send a big, strong flow of pressurized water racing through those pipes at high speed, and it can cause damage. So when you turn a ball valve on, you don't just flick it all the way on. You kind of gradually turn it on. You wait to feel the water running through it, and then when you feel it slow down, you open all the rest of the way up. But ball valve is the general replacement that we're using, and you'll find them on most of the houses today. There still are some old gate valves. it's on all those devices that we've been talking about, like backflow preventers. They're all ball valves. They're all going to be ball valves on both sides of those devices, and that's what you'll be turning on or turning off. It's really good to know how to shut all the water off to your irrigation system. You can have huge problems, and if no one is paying attention, an awful lot of water can leak when you're having an irrigation system leak. Finding the irrigation shutoff valve isn't something that you want to do when you're currently having a leak. You want to know where it is ahead of time. Like I said before, shutting off the irrigation controller isn't going to shut down a hydraulic leak. It's going to shut off anything that is currently running that is broken, but it's not going to represent something that's going to stop a continuous leak that is a hydraulic issue. You have to shut the water off to the irrigation system to get that fixed. Anytime you shut something off, first thing you do is go to the water meter. Determine whether the flow of water has come to an end. That's the best thing. That's the goal of making sure that you know how to do it. The shutoff valve, in most cases, is right there where the supply line, the service line meets to the house, where your main house shutoff, usual position for it. I will say that in a lot of houses, they have the irrigation system comes off of the house in the front of the house, and then there's another service that feeds the irrigation that comes off of the back of the house. And so you need to know whether you have one service for your irrigation, one supply, or two. In a lot of situations, there is two, and knowing that the backyard supply is separate from the front yard supply is pretty important if you're going to prevent leaks around your house. There's a picture of a ball valve, a backflow preventer with two ball valves on it. The little purple arrow pointing at the valve is showing that that valve is in the closed position. It's perpendicular to the pipe it's in. The other valve to the right that's underneath the backflow preventer is in the open position. Now, the water that travels through there is headed off to the little float in the little box in the swimming pool, if you have one of those. My house is old enough, I don't have one of those. So I fill my pool with a garden hose. But this is the way most houses are set up. They have a permanently, it's a little worker who's working really hard to keep the pool water at the exact same level. But the fact that that metal rod that comes off of that float there is in the water all the time, you know, metal is going to have some issues. It's going to corrode over time. Sometimes the float, for whatever reason, gets moved a little bit, and most of the time, if they've been there for quite a long time, they're going to break. They're going to have some kind of an issue. So you want to know, you know, where your float is, where your shutoff is to your pool. When you shut the supply line off up there where the little valve is in the perpendicular position to the pipe, you can go over and you can put your ear into the float to hear if there's water. A lot of times if the float is on and there's water traveling through it, you'll be able to hear it with your ear. It sounds, I tell people a lot of times it sounds like listening to a seashell, where you can hear that little, that's the sound of a little bit of water passing through it. When you do shut it off, the first thing you want to do is go back to that water meter and verify that the meter is not moving anymore, that you effectively shut off what was using water. So we've talked about, you know, all the stuff inside your house. We've talked about all the stuff that's related to pools and, you know, fountains and water features and jacuzzis and spas. Those are all things that are potential to leak. And irrigation systems, we've talked about all the things that can happen on the irrigation system. So you got in the house, the irrigation system, and the pools, the service line. And if you verify that you don't have any problems with any of those, all you have to do is learn how to become more efficient with things inside and outside of your house. Buying appliances that are water smart and Energy Star appliances are almost a guaranteed way to save water. A lot of people in Scottsdale and the Phoenix general area are using less water today because their appliances all use less water. Irrigation systems now, irrigation systems in the desert, they run continuously, they don't ever get a break. And like any mechanical device, irrigation systems are going to have problems over time. Just the continuous use, they're going to wear out. So you have to do some walkarounds and some identifying of problems and paying attention. You got to pay attention. Pay attention to your water bill. Pay attention to the yard. Choosing the right plants. These are all low water use plants. And watering correctly can save you quite a bit of water. When you're saving water, generally you're saving money. So inside your house, using the right type of appliances and looking for leaks on occasion. Outside of your house, making that little walk around, maybe on a Saturday morning with a cup of coffee and just walking around the yard looking for anything that could become a problem or anything that is identified as a problem. And then knowing how to use that water meter to go out and do the things that you need to do to identify exactly where that leak is really good stuff to know. So irrigation system, landscape water management, there's a lot of little details that you can do. Designing that irrigation system and maintaining it is the most important thing I can think of. Anytime we have anything out there like that and it's a mechanical device, it's going to have problems over time. Using low water use plants and installing an intelligent landscape that is going to need less water is something that we all can do. Making sure that the water that we use stays on our property and stays by the plants. Nobody wants to water a bunch of granite and watch a bunch of weeds grow. That's just something else that you have to spend time and energy on to take care of. Look at your yard, walk around it, identify if there's issues with sprinkler heads or with drip emitters. Check in the valve boxes, peek in your valve boxes from time to time and look for leaks. They're a very common area where you're going to find leaks. Wet spots in your yard, that little spot out in the yard that gets wet every time the irrigation system's on, but there's no plant there. That needs to be dug up and looked at. Know where that shutoff is. You're going to want to know where that is if you ever have a problem. Here's the tips around the pools and spas. And if you're looking for this information, it's always going to be available. It's available on scottsdaleaz.gov under publications. This whole brochure is available. All these tips are available. Monitoring evaporation. That bucket test is the best thing to know about how to check your pool. A lot of times I use pool water to water plants at my house. But I know that I'm watering those plants when the pool chemicals have dissipated. I don't backwash my pool right after I put all my chemicals in. That would be a huge mistake. Use a gauge to backwash your pool. When you backwash your pool, the pressure on your pump goes down. And when it increases by 10 pounds, it's time to backwash. And so if you pay attention to what the pressure is when you after you backwash, you'll know at what pressure you should backwash again. And you only backwash until the water turns clear. When you see that the water's dirty, you got to keep going until it stops being dirty, and then you can turn it off. Most of the time when we have someone who takes care of our pool, they backwash on a regular basis, and sometimes it doesn't even need it. Consider using a cartridge filter today. There are sand filters, there's diatomaceous earth filters, but today the most commonly used filter is a cartridge filter that requires a lot less cleaning, maybe 2 or 3 times during the season when you're using your pool, that you would pull it out and hose it off and get all the dirt and stuff out of it and put it back together. It doesn't involve sand or diatomaceous earth and or any other medium product that is meant to be in there to filter. It's just a paper filter for the most part. Properly maintaining your chemicals can save you a lot of water too. If you let the pool get out of control, and it's hard to use chemicals to control it, so you end up having to drain the water. We don't want you to have to do that. So pay attention to your chemicals and use them properly. Don't overfill your pool. You know, if you're using your pool and it's overly filled, every time somebody jumps in or somebody dives off the diving board, a whole bunch of water is going to splash out. So keep that water level at the right location. They say the right location is halfway up the skimmer box. The water should be right in the middle. And be careful if you install water features or some kind of fountain or something like that. Water that sprays up in the air, however far it falls, it can splash that far too. So water that splashes outside of your fountains is going to evaporate. It's going to leave minerals. It's going to be unsightly. So choose those kind of installations that don't have water spraying in the air. You know, in the indoor, we want you to replace those old toilets and shower heads with WaterSense labeled toilets. Avoid in-tank cleaners. The Tidy Bowl man's going to argue with me about that, but chlorine and increasing the amount of chlorine is just going to make the flapper wear out faster. Only wash full loads of clothing, but everybody should know that. Dishwashers today use a lot less water than if we wash dishes by hand, so we don't want to do that. Older reverse osmosis systems around our house used anywhere from 3 to 6 gallons for every gallon of water that they produce. And if you have an RO system, it can look like a leak at your water meter, especially if you just made a pot of coffee and you go out to look at the water meter. The RO system is going to be causing a very slow replacement of water into the canister underneath the sink, and that can look like a leak, so know that. The RO system does have a supply shut off underneath the sink, where if it is on and running and you want to get it out of the picture so that you could look for leaks on other devices, you can go underneath the sink and shut the supply water off to the RO system. We talked a little bit about softeners. The older softeners, we're having a lot of issues with softeners failing and creating a leak, a lot like an irrigation valve leak. The softener system itself can discharge water and nobody will see it. It'll just be going down the drain like water going down a toilet. That's pretty much it for this finding and fixing leaks around your house. You can find this brochure. It's available in both English and Spanish. There's some website information up there. You can also find it on our website at scottsdaleaz.gov under search for under publications. You'll find a lot of other good publications there as well, and you can find information about our rebate programs as well. With that, I think we'll see if there's any immediate questions. We are the City of Scottsdale's Water Conservation Department.
So we do have a few questions for you, Bill. The first is 16,000 gallons a month normal usage for a home that is on drip irrigation, 1 acre of land and a swimming pool? 2 people live there. And also added to that question, drips have been on every day for 35 minutes. It will be dropping down now that temperatures are dropping.
Well, I wish I could say that there is a normal amount of water used, but there are so many variables in what kind of water using features does your house have. An irrigation system and a swimming pool are going to use a certain amount of water. I don't think that amount of water is excessive for 2 people living on an acre with drip irrigation. What I think is excessive is the 35 minutes every day. Generally, there's brochures that you can look at on scottsdaleaz.gov that'll teach you how to water more efficiently. And generally, a longer, less often irrigation cycle will use less water and be healthier for your plants. So we generally recommend, like a 2-hour irrigation episode with drip irrigation. Really precise applications of water with the right number of drip emitters of the right sizes so that in 2 hours it produces the amount of water that the plant needs. So, and then when we do that correctly, we don't need to do it as often. We do it once every, 4 or 5 days in the summertime, as far apart as once every 2 weeks in the wintertime, unless it's really native material, and then we can get away with even a lot less often in the wintertime. So I think the answer to that question is probably all irrigation related, is where most of your water, excess water, is going.
Thank you, Bill. We have a question from Tim, and that question is, I have PVC pipes between the meter and house shutoff with a T supplying the irrigation. Pipe at the T has broken twice in the last 6 months. How can the T connections or joints be improved?
I think the answer to that is when we do a service line from a water meter to a house, we should use rolled copper, all one piece of pipe with no fittings, no controls in it. And if you make that irrigation system come off above the ground and not a buried location, most of the time PVC pipe is going to be buried in the yard, you'll be able to have more control over what's going on there, whether it's leaking or whether it needs to be repaired.
And a question from Jim. Should we check the water pressure to the house? What is the best way to do that?
Oh, there's a good question. Water pressure varies throughout the city. In the city of Scottsdale, we have a lot of customers who live higher than you do as far as elevation is concerned. So it is recommended that you have a pressure regulator installed if you feel your pressure is too high. And then you can adjust your pressure to what you want it to be. It takes more pressure to pump water uphill to get them to customers that live up higher. So there's a chance that if you live in the lower areas that your pressure may be higher than you want it to be. You can get a pressure gauge, you can put it on a hose bib, it'll thread onto the hose bib just like the garden hose is, and you can turn it on to see what your pressure is. You can buy any one of those at any of the box stores or even at an irrigation supply house. They make pressure gauges to check your pressure. Now, if you get a pressure regulator installed, it's something that a plumber would probably have to do. If he installs it on your supply line, they would then put a gauge on a hose bib to adjust it to the pressure that you want it to be.
Thank you, Bill. We do have an additional question from Jim, and that question is, does the city provide on-site assistance and/or water audits?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I am a certified auditor. I audit irrigation systems. I am a certified arborist. I am a certified chemical applicator. So basically my dad said I was certifiable. So if you have something like that going on, we have a program called, it's drifting from my mind, outdoor water efficiency checks. And so you can call and you can set up an outdoor water efficiency check, and we'll look at those kind of things with you. It takes about an hour, hour and a half, depending on how much irrigation you have. But if you feel like you need more understanding about how to do it, how to water it, or whether you have issues, feel free to set one of those up.
And that number is shown on the screen. It's the 312 number. All right. And we have an additional question. I have a fire sprinkler system in the house. Should I get those pipes inspected at all?
I would say yes. I think you're supposed to get your fire suppression system checked. I think the schedule is at least once every 3 years. And there are fire sprinkler system companies that will come out and do that. It's not something that the city gets involved in, and it's a separate system that is, required in any kind of property in Scottsdale. Our houses, if they catch on fire, we've got to get that put out before it catches on the whole desert. So, and it is an important system to your house, and it can present problems. There can be water hammer, there can be drainage from those systems. So yeah, you do need to get it checked on a regular basis.
Thank you, everyone, for being so engaged. We are here for a couple more minutes. If there are any additional questions, we're happy to answer them. If you are joining us after the fact or you think of something later, the email address on the screen is also always available for you to send us a question or two.
That's waterconservation@scottsdaleaz.gov.